Hey, Monica. Hey, John. Happy birthday to John. It was on the 6th.
Oh, belated happy birthday, John.
So
Thank you.
let me celebrate with. Okay, now it's here.
Um, can you guys see the screen?
I can.
Okay. All right. Um, okay. First of all, thanks to everyone who's turned up. I know the timing is a bit off for everyone, but somehow we have to make it work. Um, all right. So before we get into the actual text, I should make some motivating remarks, like some context as to why the focus on writing. Um, so beginning with STP's theory, CSTP's theory. Um, well, uh, the connecting point between what I'm doing and CSTP is the idea of the media as material basis. But in now that I've read more of the CSTP theory, I see that it's very different from what I had thought a year ago. So, okay, I will probably mangle this now, but I will try explaining the CSTP angle. So, either you look through the lens of an objective phenomenology at an ecology or an ecosystem in which there are organizations or systems, or you can look from the perspective of a system or an organization, and then the rest of the systems in the ecology, they become the environment. And when you look that way, some portions of the of the ecology, they become the material basis of interaction. Like, not all processes can be captured when seen from the view of a particular organization, and so some processes get black boxed. They are not at that same level of explanation, and that is what we call the material basis. So this sense of the material basis is, um, it's what Karatani, when he uses the word exchange in a broad sense, as intercourse. So metabolic relations and social relations both together. So I guess my focus on the media is a restricted sense of exchange. It's just social relations. So I can say in a limited sense that media is what propagates a particular mode within social relations. I'm not so much talking of the metabolic stuff here. Um, so that's a comparison from CSTP. And then obviously our big point of reference is Marx. Marx, he gives us like a benchmark, like this is how, if you want to understand money, you have to go from commodity to money, and then how money becomes commodity again as capital. So the way he goes about it is in a formal way, and that is like a level of understanding we are trying to achieve with the other modes as well. So in this presentation, we're not at that level that we can formalize. Like, this whole series of presentations is about how we can understand mode B better, and a step towards that would be formalizing. But in this presentation, we are not at that level. We're just at the level of trying to make sense of the empirical data and see then what we can do with it, how to formalize it, and so on. Okay. Two more references just for context, but these are people I've not read. So I'm just gonna wild freestyle type talk about it. First is Hegel. Uh, I mean, I'm sure Hegel somewhere talks about writing and speech. I just don't know where. I'm sure other people would know. But let's say Hegel would say that speech is like it's ephemeral, it's momentary, and it's obviously it's audible. Um, while speech is the negation, sorry, writing is the negation of speech, and that is writing is permanent and silent. Um, and then I'm just spitballing here. We can say if we take this Hegelian thing further, then the negation of the negation would be like how can writing speak again? And that would be AI. Just AI is where the archives start speaking. Um, like all this work that people have done to collect all this data on these civilizations and put them together in a way so that it's easily queried by whoever wants to research online. I mean, this was a step towards making the archives self-assembling. Like you don't have to do the work of assembling the archives. The archives will respond to your query with the structure. So anyway, this is highly speculative, and obviously Hegel was not. Um, I mean, like this isn't a correct way to say it because the jump we can say that AI is the next stage of writing, but there were intermediate steps. Basically, Hegel doesn't have a theory of money, and to get to writing to speak itself, we first had to go through bringing writing and money together as code, as like just as computer code, so that transactions and speech and everything could be sent on the same protocols. Okay. And the other person I've not read is Derrida. Derrida famously wrote a book on writing of grammatology. Again, if someone else has read it, please tell me like oh, what's where to go in it because it's a huge work. But as far as I understand, Derrida was basically he does not deal with historical evidence much, and he's building off Rousseau's essay on languages. And so yeah, so that Rousseau's idea is like it's the standard idea that first there were symbolism and art in prehistory, and then we had pictography kind of language, and then we had alphabets. And for him, it's a step up in civilization with each thing. Um, One final random quote. Nietzsche also somewhere says, "You can't get rid of God till you get rid of grammar." So just anyway, okay. We were discussing a book in our Discord. There's this new book on modes of production, The Final Frontier, and there they obviously we are talking of modes of exchange. They were talking of modes of production, but even they work in the same way. They take three modes of production: the Bush mode, the tributary mode, and the capitalist mode. And anyway, in the last chapter, they try to define what the what is the social effects of these modes. And so I'm just going to quote a passage from the last chapter of the book because it's a general outline of what our concerns are also. You can change mode of production here with mode of exchange and it will apply to our case. So the quote is a distinct logic of space, time, subjectivity, knowledge, and language corresponds to each mode of production, allowing both the forces and relations of productions the intelligibilities within which they develop. Though to be clear, these platforms or structures are designed as a result of the forces and relations of production and in turn condition the everyday life and expressive cultures that characterize social being. The following chapter in their book, the following chapter will offer sketches of each mode of production attentive to these dimension or logic, save for that of language, because neither of us is a linguist. So I'm just saying I have the same concerns and I'm also not a linguist, but I'm still going to talk about writing and languages. So, all right. So this opening slide, this is a clay envelope with tokens. You can see some tokens have some lines, parallel lines on them. So those are the complex tokens and the other ones are the simple tokens. And these tokens would be inside these clay envelopes and these would serve as accounting, yeah, just to hold accounts instead of having a double account ledger. Back then, 5,000 years ago, it was these clay balls, they're called bulle. You can also see a seal on the bulle. That's probably whatever department was maintaining the accounts, they were stamping the seals. Okay. So, since in Monica's presentation, she laid out the geography and ecological conditions at the beginning of settlement in China.
Hey,
So I
Sid,
thought
I shortly interrupt you because apparently for several people
Yeah,
there's
now it's gone. No, now it's back.
now it's there again.
Yeah, there's a
Like
big
that.
gray square on the screen.
Oh, okay.
Now there are
Now
two.
there's a second one.
Now they look even more organized.
Just a second. Just a second. Can you guys see now the full screen?
There's still one down.
Now it's
Yeah, now you
bigger.
moved it to the very center.
Okay. I see. The problem is I have a presenter screen and it's
Wait, I sent you a screenshot. That helps.
I see it. So if I minimize the main screen, will it?
Now it's good.
Yeah, now it's readable.
Just a second, guys. You guys can see the screen now? No?
It's good now.
Yeah? Oh man, I don't know what happened. Sorry, can you guys see the screen fully? No? Okay. What about now?
This is
I
okay.
mean, they're gone, but like it seems like you have not solved like the root of the problem. There's like a small box at the top, so they might pop up again.
That is just the screen sharing tab. I guess I can just run it this way.
At the moment, it's good. So
Okay, I'll try running it this way. All right. So yes, um, I thought I should give a sense of the place where all this action takes place of writing. So as you can see, this is. Uh, can you guys see my cursor? Okay, excellent. So we are going to start in this Sumer area, and the main action is at Uruk, and then the ecological the climate change thing at that time was that the Persian Gulf was receding. So as the Persian Gulf receded, this curved portion, this was the extension of the Gulf into the land, and it came down. I mean, if you go back further, this was all covered by the sea, and the people were up in the mountains here, and so this area is present day Syria, I guess, or yeah, and Elam is present day Iran, and Sumer is present day Iraq. So as the sea receded, after Uruk, the two other big cities came up, Ur and Lagash. Um, and yeah, but in the second half of the presentation, we will be focusing more on Elam. Um, this is because, well, there is a difference in how the archaeological evidence in Sumer, the archaeological evidence is compiled from several sites. So getting the chronology to align with multiple sites is much harder than in Elam, where all the excavations, the major chunk of tablets come from this place called Susa. And so there you have one excavation point, and so you can see how the evidence turns up one after the another in the archaeological layers. So there's not you don't have to corroborate multiple sites and multiple lines of archaeological evidence. It's much clearer. So okay. All right. So an overview of the sequence of developments. The development of writing took many millennia, stretching from the use of tokens in prehistoric villages by the 8th millennium BC to the Greek invention of the alphabet around the start of the 1st millennium BC. The emergence of cuneiform writing itself was not an event horizon marking the beginning of a new kind of society. Tokens were used to organize state-based societies already before the shift to writing, and tokens continues to be used even after the shift. So, like for around 500 years, from 3500 BC to 3000, you can say that tokens had organized a fully fledged state. And even where this presentation will end, around the time the Greeks come up with the alphabet, the Greeks were at the margin of the Persian Empire, and within the Persian Empire, the villages were still, all the material from the villages was being collected and warehoused using tokens. So even when we finish this 3000-year span, like tokens were still prevalent when fully alphabetic writing came up. Okay, so Danish van Baserat, on whose book this whole token stuff is everyone's taken up from, she summarizes the sequence of these techniques from tokens to tablets. She introduces in another book as follows, and I'm just making this long quote because this way, it's just, yeah, this will give you an overview of the whole thing. Well, at least the first half. So the immediate precursor of cuneiform writing was a system of tokens. These small clay objects of many shapes, cones, spheres, discs, cylinders, etc., evolved to meet the needs of the economy, at first keeping track of the products of farming, then expanding in the urban age to keep track of goods. The development of token was tied to the rise of social structures, emerging with rank leadership and coming to a climax with state formation. Also corresponding to the increase in bureaucracy, methods of storing tokens in archives were devised. One of these storage methods employed clay envelopes, simple hollow clay balls in which the tokens were placed and sealed. A drawback of the envelopes was that they hid the enclosed tokens. Accountants eventually resolved the problem by imprinting the shape of the tokens on the surface of the envelopes prior to enclosing them, and soon realized that the tokens within the envelopes were made unnecessary by the presence of markings on the outer surface. As a result, tablets, solid clay balls bearing markings, replaced the hollow envelopes filled with tokens. These markings became a system of their own, which developed to include not only impressed markings but more legible signs traced with a pointed stylus. Both of these type of symbols, which derived from tokens, were picture signs or pictographs. Okay. So this is a typology of the tokens. And yeah, just some brief info of it. What was new about tokens was that they formed a system of signifiers in which each type had a discrete meaning in relation with other types. The same token could represent different values in different measuring systems of land survey, grain, fluids, etc. For the first 4 millennia, tokens remained simple in shape and limited in number of types. Shapes could be abstract, geometric, or naturalistic. The first tokens occur with the appearance of a quantum jump in cereal yields, implying their association with agriculture. Around 3500 BC, types started to multiply and develop subtypes. They were also now marked, usually with parallel lines, pits, circles, etc. Both complex and simple tokens were found together in the same hoards or envelopes, so they were used for the same transaction. So some of the more common tokens are, this one here is for sheep. It's pretty abstract. And this one here will play a role again. It will come up. It's for oil. And this tetrahedron, this is a work day. This is like a measure of labor time. This is a work day, a man's work day. And I believe this double tetrahedron is a work week, but I'm not sure. So simple tokens arose as the technology that enabled accounting in ranked societies. Complex tokens, on the other hand, arose with the state. In fact, complex counters came and went with the rise and fall of the Uruk temple. So it was really particular to the Uruk city-state. The next step towards writing was the shift from hollow envelopes with markings on the exterior that corresponded with their contents to solid tablets with impressed signs. Whereas the markings on envelopes repeated only the message encoded in the tokens held within, the signs impressed on the tablets were the message. The first signs of the accounting tablets signified commodity and its count at the same time. Later, the accountants at Uruk came up with two types of signs: numerals, symbols encoding abstract numbers, and pictographs, signs expressing commodities. Pictographs were incised, whereas numerals were impressed, clearly standing out from the text. So this is very well illustrated in this development here. This is that same token we just saw, the one for oil. So as you can see, this sequence of developments very well recorded. For example, the example we're taking here is 1 jar of oil, 1 silla of oil. So it is represented by 1 token at the Uruk 6 level. So in 3500 BC, just using 1 token for it. And then at at 3100 BC at the Uruk 4 level, you get two signs, one and a jar of oil. So one, as you can see here, is impressed. They have just used the token to impress on the clay, while the jar of oil is a drawn out thing, but it's being drawn out with a rounded stylus, not the cuneiform pointed stylus. And then in Uruk 3, like 100 years later, there is a sequence of three signs to represent one jar of oil. And so the abstraction of commodity as a pictograph arose along with the abstraction of quantity, how much, out of an intermediate sign that arose along with the abstraction of number, how many. So the developments that we've seen till now, I'm just summarizing this here in a schematic diagram. So the sequence, the archaeological sequence, we first find tokens, and then in the second stage we find clay envelopes. Tokens are in envelopes, tokens make impression on envelopes, and then at the next stage the clay envelopes become solid, they become tablets, and there are still tokens being used to impress on the tablets, but further from this, the tokens will stop being used and it will just be the tablets with written on with the stylus. And this sequence, along with this, the sequence of abstraction that's happening is, first we have concrete counting. Each token is just a representation of a thing, and it just has to be repeated as many times the things are. And then you get number out of it when we start impressing tokens on the envelope surface. But we have the other sign is mixed. It's still got quantity and commodity together, so which is, I'm just calling it bunch of stuff. And then it gets abstracted into a counter, a jar. In our example, its number would be 1, unit counter would be jar, and then the commodity would be oil. So again, further from this, all of this previous stuff won't matter much, and in fact, out of pictograms, out of the abstraction of commodity, we'll get the abstraction of speech, of phonetics. So that is the jump that we're getting into. But first, from tokens we shift to tablets. Okay, so all the previous developments, Besserath summarizes as that each change of reckoning device, tallies are prehistoric, tallies we didn't cover today. This presentation is sort of a continuation of the presentation on speech, and we did cover tallies a bit there. So each change of reckoning device, tallies, plain tokens, complex tokens, corresponded to a new form of economy, hunting, gathering, agriculture, or industry. Each change of reckoning device also corresponded to a new political system, egalitarian society, rank society, the state. Pictographic and later phonetic writing, however, was independent of any socio-economic event. It was the outcome of a new threshold in cognitive development, abstract counting. And now from that counting, we still continue with the counting stuff. So this material comes from Peter Damerow, Hans Neeson, and Robert Englund. These guys' book, Archaic Bookkeeping. It came out of the work of cataloging the accounting tablets, just as Denis Besserath's work came out of cataloging the tokens. Now, the surface of most of these tablets, especially after Uruk 3, that's 3000 BC, it's divided into columns and cases, as you can see on this tablet here. And each case in the column has 1 unit of information. So that 1 unit of information, as you can see, it has a number impressed, these impressed curves and circles that are tokens being impressed into the clay surface. And there are some signs which are being drawn. So you can again see the sheep sign and the obviously the fish sign. So yeah, so these are accounting tablets. Now, in these archaic texts, in these accounting tablets, there are four kinds of signs. There are partial or complete pictograms, which are stylistically similar to earlier designs. And all of these are like prehistoric art, they directly depict the object. Then natural or abstract symbols with a figurative sense, such as a reed bundle for the goddess Inanna. Then abstract signs such as the circle and cross for small cattle, but that's really sheep. And numerical and metrological signs, because the numbering system was much more complex than the writing system at this point. And in this earliest phase, the signs just designated concepts or nominal and perhaps also verbal roots, although lacking any apparent syntactic relation within the text. So since these are accounting tablets, we can't really say, like, we see that these signs continue and appear in later texts where you can say that yes, they're being used to write words. But at this point in the accounting tablet, we just don't have enough grammatical info to confidently say that they're writing a particular language. Okay. So this is the big step that we like, from where you can say that yes, now it is being used to write language. That's phonetic abstraction. Signs were combined, although rarely on a phonetic basis. The principle of phonetic abstraction was applied for the first time probably during Uruk phase 3, when a sign could represent another word with similar pronunciation regardless of its original meaning. The classic example is the sign T for arrow coming to represent life, till. These are the first indications of the speech behind the script. In fact, a script only becomes bound to a language in the process of acquiring phonetic values. Phonetic abstraction was helped by the fact that most Sumerian words were monosyllabic. This process led to syllabic spelling, and thus names and words which lacked signs could now be written down. More importantly, grammatical relations could now be notated. By the middle of the third millennium, the process of phonetic abstraction had sped up when Akkadian began to place new demands on writing. So this other language had to be written with the same script. Akkadian inflected its verbs depending on tense and mode. So in contrast to the agglutinating Sumerian system, according to which the verbal root always remained the same, the inflected spoken form of an Akkadian verb could not be represented by the same sign, once differences in time and mode were supposed to be expressed. Akkadian could hence only be properly represented by phonetic signs, which in the case of cuneiform script were syllabic. Okay. And this is just the development of the form of the script, like how it looks. The formal appearance changed drastically because early on pointed stylus was used. Then, however, etching rounded lines on a clay surface was inconvenient since clay tends to break off. So a more efficient technique of etching straight lines with a triangle section stylus began to be used by Uruk phase 3. This is again 3000 BC. So you can see the change in design when you stop using a rounded one and start using this cuneiform one. This caused a significant change in the shape of signs, not to mention the characteristic wedge-shaped impression, deeper and wider at the head of a line, from which cuneiform writing gets its name. So this proper, now we're just talking of writing with the stylus. This proper cuneiform writing was already in use by Uruk IV, 3100 BC, but it became prevalent in Uruk III, 3000 BC, and continued to develop through the Jemdet Nasr period, 2900 BC, completed the signs and the style of writing, and it was completed by the time of archaic tablets from Ur, which is 2700 BC, and it becomes phonetically abstract by the Farah period, 2600 BC. which is the time of the first royal inscriptions and literary archives. The tradition of making circular and semicircular numerical signs with the round section end of the stylus continued until Ur3. Not only the formal features of the script, but the structuring of the clay surface also changed from accounting style segmentation, those columns and cases, into tables of columns and cases to proper script lines. After the period of the reign of Ianatum of Lagash, 2400 BC, speech determined the ordering of the script. So it's, so really till 2400 BC, we can't really say we have proper language. We have accounting, definitely. We know a lot about the measuring systems, the numbering systems, and all of that. But it's not. We don't have. We can say that they might be referring to all the accounting stuff in a particular language, but the evidence cannot confirm it. Okay. So now for these, this was the evidence part of the presentation. And now we will just go over the same sequence of developments, but from a philosophical angle. And it will involve some phenomenology stuff too, just our bodies and experience of reading and writing and stuff like that. So the first guy whose theories I'm presenting is Jean Bottero. You can see him here with some tablets and stuff in front of him. So it would help to go over this development of writing from an economic mnemotechnic to script more slowly to bring out the development of thinking along with it. Jean Bottero divides this process into 3 stages: pictography, phonetism, and writing proper. In the archaic tablets, we have only been able to decipher the numerical system used for accounting wholly, not the other signs, because the relations between these signs or these signs and the numbers are not made explicit. This is because at this rudimentary stage of writing, the signs are pictograms. Each sign translates, first of all, the object that it depicts, that it sketches, that it evokes immediately. These signs have less to do with language, relations expressed through syntax, and more with art. This stuff is from chapter 5 of his book Mesopotamia. Okay. The difference of, so now we've seen the continuity between art and pictography, and now the difference is now drawing a pictogram for each concrete object is not practically viable. So just as a drawing can be associated with more things than the one immediately depicted, a pictogram can have multiple associations, such as the sign for a mountain also coming to suggest foreign lands, since Mesopotamia's borders were defined by mountain chains. These associations can be extended to more abstract terms, and pictograms could be combined to represent scenes, such as the combination of signs for eye and water to represent tears. Ordering of combined pictograms followed ordering in art for a long time. The radical difference between art and pictography, the change of nature, is a deliberate and manifest desire to signify at the same time the more generalized and the more distinct, that is, to systemize the signs. So the signs became uniform and the repertory organized into lists. The different possible meanings of a sign are reduced to a definite number, and the use of scenes made up of signs became general while their meanings became specific, such as the sketch of a woman in mountains representing not a mountain woman or foreign woman, but only the woman brought back from abroad as a booty of war, in other words, a slave of the female sex. So, pictography versus phonetism. So now we're getting into the phonetic part. Till now, we were just dealing with the stuff available on the accounting tablets. This is after we can get that, yes, they are writing words. Pictography as this sort of graphic system is a script of things, a thing as it is thought, but still a thing as in art. The ability of such a system, I'm quoting him, it's a long quote, The ability of such a system to signify is rudimentary and slight. If only things, let us say in Aristotelian language, substances can be represented by immediate representation or by representations mediated for each of them by a sketch as stable and as immobile as the things themselves, how can one indicate incidents? That is, the movement of things in their mobility itself, the relationship between things, possession, causality, simultaneity, finality, etc., and the numerous details that surround them and define them concretely. Only language is capable with its words of rendering entirely the way in which we see the reality. Its full words indicate the things, the substances, and its hollow words or their grammatical equivalents indicate nuances and incidents. But pictography is not a script of words. So, because pictography is incapable of reconstructing the completeness of a concrete situation, it can absolutely not play the role of a teacher or informer vis-a-vis the reader. It cannot reveal to him in a precise fashion a truth that he did not know, but only remind him of an event or a string of events, the detail of which he was already informed of before. So this is why pictography remains a mnemotechnique, because pictograms are paradoxically enigmatic and intuitively recognizable at the same time. Enigmatic because we don't have the full context. Intuitive because you see a pictograph of a fish, you know it's a fish, but like in what context? Is it being sold, bought, given, rationed, what? The link between signs and words was established with phonetism. Recall the sign for arrow now standing in for life through homophony. The formal change that underwrote this shift was the style to the cuneiform stylus, which made the signs so stylized that they lost all realism. We can call this the shift from pictograms to logograms. So now in logophonograms, it's only at this point we can confirm that the signs represent a language and that the language is Sumerian, in which the homophony is possible. The sign is no longer attached to an object but a bit of sound, a phoneme, something not concrete but universal, belonging to speech. Accordingly, the sign is no longer only a logogram but also a phonogram. The graphic system is no longer a script of things but a script of words. It no longer transmits only thought but also speech and language. And as such, even though one needs henceforth to know the language of the person who has written something in order to understand the writing, on the other hand, what is written is able to indicate everything that is expressed in the spoken language and as it is expressed there. So, yes, now we have a script which is capable of writing down words and speech, but of course, you need to know the language. However, as the discovery of the phonetic principle did not historically coincide with its immediate adoption through full-scale reformation of the script, it remained complementary to logography. Since script was primarily used for accounting of things, there was no pressure to exploit it to express grammatical relations. This coexistence of logography and phonetism made writing more complicated, as signs now carried multiple meanings and their associated phonetic values. So context and determinative signs fixed their readings. The number of signs gradually halved over the centuries, starting from around 1200 in the earliest phase. From the Farah periods onwards, that's when they start writing, the script is now ordered according to speech. It's being written according to speech. So from the Farah periods onwards, we can understand a majority of the signs, and therefore the details of each document can be sufficiently clear to us, even if occasionally the entire and precise sense escapes us. So this is the maximum of comprehension that can be obtained from logography, where full words dominate. And then we finally get to a proper script of speech. So the pressure to couple script to speech to faithfully express language, as England's account also had pointed out, it came with the use of the Semitic language Akkadian and the obligation to transcribe that language with the logophonograms originally used for Sumerians. Not just the Semitic names and words, but their grammar and expression and everything. Akkadian became the state language later on. Semitic full words changed constantly according to their role in the sentence. So their transcription had to be phonetic, tense, mode, not just Akkadian, but even Sumerian needed to be written phonetically since its oral tradition was dying out by the end of the third millennium. So by the time the Akkadian Empire is coming up and Akkadians becoming the state language, Sumerian is already like almost a dead language. Its oral tradition is dying out. So even Sumerian had to be written with some phonetic info so that people could continue reproducing the text properly. So we see progressively the writing down of all the prefixes, affixes and suffixes that are indispensable to the clarity of the spoken language in addition to the recording of the full words. In this way, the cuneiform script became capable not only of commemorating the known but also of teaching the new. We can call this a script of speech. However, the script was to remain imperfect and primitive because it never rid itself of logograms. Since context determined whether the signs had to be read phonetically or semantically, there always remained an element of decipherment which required knowledge of the language and context. Thus, it preserved the need for a degree of initiation into an oral tradition where the script is limited to being a mnemotechnic. So, I would just like to note here that the pressure to perfect or complete how to represent speech through writing, that pressure came from the interaction between languages, like when they had to share a script. And it's sort of similar to, how in Karatani the modes arise because at the level of communities, like when communities have to interact with each other, that's where the modes arise. So similarly here, the languages interact when they have to share a script, and that's how we get a better script. All right. So after all this logosyllabary, because the phonetic value, the logograms are now standing in for either semantic or phonetic value. The phonetic value is a syllable. It's not consonants or vowels as we know it. So in the 15th century, the Phoenician alphabet was formed under the influence of cuneiform. When the script was reduced to the smallest possible number of univocal signs that correspond exactly to the fundamental and the virtual sounds of the language. That is, that it indicated only the consonants and left it to the reader to supply vowels according to the knowledge of the language and context. So Barry Powell points out in his book, Writing, Theory and History of the Technology of Civilization, that the great advantage of phonetic ambiguity in logosyllabaries and consonantal alphabets is that the speakers of different dialects can recognize similar spellings pronounced in different ways. But this very flexibility, maintaining a desirable looseness between graphic sign and speech sound, also inhibits precise description and original expression. There is no room for neologisms, they will not be understood. This is the same thing that Botero was saying, like how you have to be clued into the tradition to get the language. So thus, even then, the script didn't express everything. The coupling of script to speech was completed only with the Greeks, who added signs for vowels to the alphabet. However, they didn't do this coupling with any intention to be original, but to precisely transcribe dactylic poetry, whose rhythm was composed of combined or elongated vowels, as well as marking cluster of consonants at the start of a sound. Stuff like, how in democracy there is a CR, crazy, kratos is the word, and so KR, how do you show it in a logosyllabary that these two consonants have to be pronounced together without using a vowel? So it's stuff like that. That's why the Greek took the Phoenician alphabet and added vowels to it. All right. So we've gone over the evidence and we've gone over one philosophical account of it. And now I've taken too much time, but the last portion is important. Okay, so this is a chart just to reorient everyone. So this is from Wikipedia. And so if you see here from the left, we've not been talking about the Egyptian script, but it's, as far as I know, in Egypt there were again the same sort of developments as Mesopotamia, and ultimately they had like three scripts. One was this hieroglyphs, the stuff that you find on architecture and inscriptions, which is closer to pictographs. And then from the hieroglyphs, there was another more cuneiform kind of script, but still syllabic. And there was a script that the priests used between themselves, which was a more consonantal alphabet kind of script. I think it's called the Demotic Egyptian script. And it was from that Egyptian Demotic script, which the priest used, that this development happened of the Proto-Canaanite alphabet, and from that the Phoenician alphabet. And from Phoenician alphabet we get all our modern Latin, Greek, all the modern stuff. Also from the Egyptian line there was this development of the Cretan hieroglyphs and linear A and B. I believe these are undeciphered. I'm not sure, but I think they're undeciphered. We just went through the Mesopotamian line, and then there were further developments too. And now we are gonna talk about centered on Elam, which is the portion in Iran, the plateaus which neighbor Mesopotamia. And here there is again like uptake from the pictographic, the accounting early script, and which went from Proto-Elamite to Linear Elamite, and then from the cuneiform they again took the Elamite version of the cuneiform script. This Indian script here is from Harappan civilization, Mohenjo-daro and all. It's undeciphered, but people say it's probably closely related to southern Indian languages, Dravidian languages. And this is China here. Monica talked all about it last time. So yeah. Alright. So this is the final philosophical account. I'll try to get through it quickly. So this is Clarice Herenschmidt. I'm having a tough time pronouncing all these names. Herenschmidt was a student of Botero. Her whole work is in Proto-Elamite and cuneiform Elamite, and the whole up till when the Old Persian and the early forms of Persian and Arabic start. She's worked a lot on all that. So another civilization called Elam grew at the same time as Mesopotamia to its east in the plains, Susa and plateaus of modern Iran. Geographically, Susa was part of Mesopotamia and adapted Mesopotamian writing to write the Proto-Elamite language. Herenschmidt's work is based on this region. Unlike Botero, but like Besserat, she emphasizes the precedence of the writing of numbers. So in Botero's account, we saw that jump from art to phonetism, from pictography to phonetism. But Botero is from the same generation as Derrida, and so I think both of them are taking basically Rousseau's model of the development of script, and so they don't recognize that how it actually started through accounting, through like the abstraction of number happened first for the abstraction of speech to happen. And that is what Danish Besserath and Clarice Herenschmidt, both of them emphasize that the writing of numbers came before the writing of things. We didn't just go from the writing of things to the writing of words. So this is a long quote from her. Writing therefore did not begin with a graphic representation of the objects of a transaction, but with their quantities. In the writing of numbers, the first operation consisted of thinking a number, the second of representing the number by a calculus. Pictograms are the writings of things, as Jean Botero calls it. Although pictograms have no graphic relation to language, since there seems to be no expression in writing of sounds or of grammatical elements, still they are based on the process of naming. After all, the goods involved in a transaction had to be named. Pictograms are portraits of things in the world, which are already represented by their names. Here too, as with numerals, we are dealing with the representation of the representation. The writing of numbers, like the writing of things, hides the first mental creation, numeration and naming. At present, our documentation allows us to say that it was the stage of the writing of numbers that led to the written representation of things. So this is basically it's a criticism of Botero. Okay. However, the conditions for writing to appear were not simply economic, but religious. Since religion at the time was not separate, but the basis of a political economy, there could only have been writing. I'm now gonna be quoting a lot from her, so these are all quotes. There could only have been writing a visible representation of those invisible mental acts of numeration and naming, to the extent that the representatives of the invisible gods had already imprinted their order among humans. Much later, by the time of Sivepala Hupak inscriptions from around 1765 BC, these inscriptions were written bilingually in Elamite and Akkadian, but using the same cuneiform script. So this is the development in Elam. Just like how in Mesopotamia we saw the transition from pictography to phonetism, it's happening in Elam in 1765 BC when they started using the same script to write two languages. This signals the rise of a more abstract conception of language in Elam, that they could universally be divided into syllables. The realization that signs and syllables are independent of each other led to a conscious appropriation of language and undermined the status of language as a pure given that had to be integrated as the social background along with birth, death, family ties, etc. Again, a long quote from her. While all cultures and civilizations have a theory of language, few among them believe that language is something created by humans. Therefore, we find myths about language everywhere. Myths that do not appear as such, but that combine an explanation of the nature and origin of things with the nature and origin of their names. The myths of the origin of language concern the names of things. The names of things are not man-made. Language is the condition of the myth of the myth. This idea of language as a self-referred condition of myth is eroded and destroyed by writing. The primary victim of writing is the myth. Right, and now we are slowly moving towards consonantal alphabets. So in the second millennium, when the Elamites, this is again a quote from her, in the second millennium when the Elamites separated the language from the signs that were used to write it, when Babylonian scholars were making their mathematics shine in all their brilliance, wherein Mari, I believe it's in Syria, when in Mari prophets appeared who spoke in the name of the gods, things of the world tended to be disassociated from their names. Names began to lose their absolute value, being divided into syllables, which could be the same in Elamite and in Akkadian. In short, the bodies of humans no longer vanished between things and their names. They seemed to integrate this strange relationship by making it explicit as a syllabary, and people gradually appropriated the language. So, once writing systems express sound from the point of view of the writing subject, the sign left the external environment perceived by sight and hearing and showed humans as thinking and speaking. its point of application from being outside of the person came to be lodged inside him. This passage is sort of I've anticipated things which are going to happen. Like this passage should come later, because we still have to get to this point of the point of application coming to be lodged inside a person. That still has to happen. So, in general, she just divides antiquity into absolute, which is absolute antiquity is Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Elam, whose scripts are distant to us. We don't actually deal with them. And then there's relative antiquity, which we commonly call classical antiquity, which is Israel, Greece, India, China. So this division is nice when we're talking about all these old ancient stuff. So in absolute antiquity, so now we're just going to compare and get to the consonantal alphabets. In absolute antiquity, the logosyllabic scripts, the phonetic logograms and all that, they internalize things as names, they externalize speech, whether as a sign evoking an object and its name or a syllable heard. These signs refer to the perceived external world. By contrast with consonantal alphabets, Hebrew, Arabic, Brahmi, the script expresses in writing a sound from the point of view of the speaking subject. She reiterates, like Botero, that reading a logosyllabic script requires context and knowledge of the language, a synthetic mental apperception. Reading isn't linear but global. That is, the signs have to be differentiated into groups in a single operation that already requires understanding. By contrast, in a consonantal alphabet, the reader doesn't have to group signs, but they still have to supply the right vowels in the right places. Here, reading means vocalizing, reassembling syllables. If the sign in a logosyllabary refers to the sound heard, the sign in a consonantal alphabet refers to the syllable spoken. Both are used to write only full words. In order to vocalize, this act of reading necessitates the restoration, a sort of vision in fact, of the semantic core, which is then separated from what surrounds it. So here too, reading is blended with understanding, even in the consonantal alphabet. Okay, again, long quote from her. Logosyllabic writing systems reflected the thought that things in the world, their names and their signs, are all three identical and treated the syllable as something in the external world. And these collected entities established a continuum of signs in which the people found themselves included as in the midst of a forest of symbols. In consonantal alphabets, the disjunction between the unit of analysis of the language, the syllable, and the graphical unit, the consonant and the word, established another world-language subject continuum, which went from the name of the things to the human psychic activity and the mental assembling of syllables, but at the same time removed the objective support of the syllable in the writing. So now, unlike for logograms which represented a syllable, the syllable is not there, but when you read it, you have to produce it. So here the syllable was no longer thought of as something heard, but something virtual, produced in the act of reading. Although it was virtual, it remained indispensable to the relation between signs and language, between reading and understanding. The consonant here was not a true consonant that contrasted and formed a pair with vowels. Rather, it represented an articulatory matrix, but without breath, which came from elsewhere. Consonantal alphabets meant significant progress in humans' appropriation of language, but they did not inscribe the sounds in the body of the speaker, but halfway between his body and his speech. And now we get to the complete alphabet. The Greeks complete the alphabet, the graphical unit of the script. The signifier was now also the unit of analysis of language, the phoneme. This writing of vowels changed the status of certain consonants, which became a way to notate non-sounds, which are these occlusive consonants such as P, T, K, B, D, G, M, etc. They now designated a position of the organs of articulation. These signs refer to the body of the reader and evoke the mute, interior, and private speech. Reading such a script is a linear act. Again, long quote. This is why alphabetic writing is so similar to speech. It follows without need or desire to go back, the flow of time that passes. Unlike what happens with consonant alphabets, reading the complete alphabet does not require the language, only understanding it does. We've all had the experience of reading a difficult sentence without understanding it. And by the disassociation of reading from comprehension, the complete alphabet introduced the mind-body dualism. Nothing like this existed in other writing systems, not in the pictologographic systems in which the whole formed by the thing in the world, the graphic sign, and the word turned writing into a tangible double of the tangible word, nor in consonant alphabets in which reading implied reading what one already knew, the lexicon and the morphological structure of the language. With the Greek alphabet, one could read everything without understanding anything. The complete alphabet reveals both the inner workings of the speaking body and the universal nature of human language. So, after this is the concluding slides. I just want to point out here that we can talk of these scripts, the logosyllabaries, the consonantal alphabets, and the complete alphabets in terms of the modes of exchange. The logosyllabary script is most strongly associated with state power, with mode B. Now, when mode B was dominant, mode D arose as religion. And the argument here, this whole stress on in how in consonantal alphabets you have to produce the words by giving breath to the articulatory matrix. This is the sort of this is how language is treated in the universal religions, in Judeo-Christian, well, in this context specifically in the Jewish tradition, because Hebrew is that kind of a language, and even in Persian, Old Persian and all that, it's the same. And so these languages are more associated with mode D under mode B, religion arising when universal religion arising in the times of state. And of course, the complete alphabet is associated with the Greeks and the beginning of monetary economy and all that. So we can say that the complete alphabet is associated with mode C. Okay. All right. So concluding slide. It took over 2 millennia to simplify phonetic scripts into an alphabet which made it accessible to everyone, unlike the Orient where it was the prerogative of the scribal class. However, the complete alphabet is not perfectly rationalized. For example, since we took the Greeks had no signs for aspiration at the start of a word, and so had to introduce 2 signs to indicate the presence or absence of aspiration later on. More generally, no alphabet in the world transcribes its intonation or stress. Further, there can be so many spellings. Actually, since there's no alphabet that transcribes its intonation or stress, that's why the Phonetic Association had to invent their own alphabet. Further, there can be so many spellings for the same sound in modern English, French, etc., that we have to treat words like logograms again. Thus, quote, what characterizes the complete alphabet from the Greek alphabet to our own remains a tension between the rational and the irrational, the impossible graphic trapping of the intention of speech, and the endless current behind the passing of time. From another point of view, from a more quantitative point of view, the Orientals, quote unquote, absolute antiquity, they preferred rich writing overflowing with signs and meanings, just proliferating, while the Westerners, relative antiquity, they preferred poor writing, even if it meant the loss of phonetic information. So here the relative antiquity includes consonantal alphabets. Through writing, we took hold of language gradually from within, from the point of view of the speaking subject, and the split between comprehension and reading was at the root of the subject split into subject and object. This step taken by the Greeks, it consigned absolute antiquity to oblivion because for the latter, for absolute antiquity, language was not a field of experimentation and creativity but a given. Logosyllabaries and consonantal alphabets protected them from an awareness of the structure of language, that speech could be elaborated as a separate world unto itself, as discourse. The earliest discourses were of metaphysics, and they protected them from an awareness of the structure of language and the social consequences of that realization. And just the final slide, guys. So this proliferation of signs, and so just an example of that key. The Elamites reduced the 600 signs in Sumerian logosyllabary to around 150. Like they just kept the phonetic stuff, and they only kept 30 logograms, pure pictograms, which were signs for entire words. However, this reform was gradually reversed, and much like Egyptians and Mesopotamians, they increased the number of logograms. In 1400 BC, 1 in 6 signs was a logogram, but by 600 BC, the ratio was 1 in 2. Herenschmidt argues that the counterintuitive increase in logographic signs was a way of protecting ourselves from radical desymbolization, a way of holding on to the mythical frame where things could be controlled through their names. However, even the Greeks didn't follow through on the logical consequence of radical desymbolization that their alphabet implied. The idea that meaning rests on convention and that signs are arbitrary, these were rejected, and the philosopher making them question their conventions was sentenced to death. And so, in Plato's tradition, this final quote from Herenschmidt, I'm just going to read it out. I don't understand it fully, so we are ending on a note of aporia. If anyone can tell me how these clauses after the M dash make up the argument that she's making, I can't make full sense of it. Thus, the Athenians wanted to have nothing to do with our situation in language, caught between the inconceivable universal and the subject who soliloquizes. By the way, it was going to require 20 more centuries of history to get that far, to Christianity and its double theory of language. God, master of the words that create, Christ made man in the world, the birth of nations or that which is within linguistic borders, implying grammar and spelling as being median locations between the subject and the universal, and the printing press or the duplicating of time that it implies. Alright, that was it. I'm sorry I took a lot of time.
I mean, considering the breadth of time we just went over, I think it was actually pretty short.
Should we take a break?
Yeah, maybe that would be a good idea. So 5.
5 minutes.
Felipe, I'm just gonna make you a host because I'll have to move to my cell phone here. This way the connection doesn't drop, okay?
Okay.
Wait, will this undo the recording? No, it won't. Okay, that's fine.
Shall we start with the questions or with the discussion? I don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
please
That was
do.
just for I'm not sure if I have a first question to start with, but it was just to say some words so that the others hear
Okay.
we start.
Well, I should first of all apologize for the screen cover up where, like, someone pointed out in the chat that I should have just shared the whole screen. I was trying out this presenter view and it opens a new window.
I mean, to just counter that, I really liked how you presented, like how you styled the presentation and how you structured everything. Like, I feel I could follow much more easily than, for example, in comparison to the last presentation. So that was really, even though there's like so much information and such a huge range of um, like historical situations and blah 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 that you cover, like I could follow, um,
Thank God.
which was really great.
Uh,
Thank you for that. Like I can only imagine how much like time it needs to process like all of that to get it into like a stage um,
yeah.
where you can present it in such a digestible way.
Yeah, I've only been developing it following, like, how you guys have been presenting it, talking with you guys. Uh, that's how it's come up. I'm happy it made some sense, like there was a sequence. So yeah, anyone has questions or doubts or like, I'm sure people would have wanted to stop me in the middle, but yeah.
I mean, I can start with like one vague thought, which started in a conversation with Monica last time. Um, that um, like starting with mode B, we already like have like we have like this huge development of like tools to visualize society to itself. And I don't know, like I'm sure there are also like tools for this visualization in mode A. I mean, there are, but like this seems to be like a high pressure like to find new forms, also like to like reach various forms of abstractions, um, in order for mode B societies like to like develop an image of themselves. Um, uh, and one thing, one like we had like in the talk with Monica, we had like two of those ways to visualize. One was the map, which kind of like showed like different ways of like having a border and fragmented borders, like walls around the city and like walls inside the city, and like something which kind of like seemed really nice, seemed to match really nicely with this topology of this of fence. This and then we had those diagrams, which were not like historical, but like a way to kind of like those graphs, right? where you saw like the settlement and then like those sub-settlements and how they are connected. And it seemed like that the logistical structure of those Mode B societies, like it seems to offer itself or to lend itself for like those graph theoretic depictions. And now with your presentation, so like if we associate like topology and property with each other, like property, fence, and topology, and if we associate the algebra and like order theoretical notions with logistics, it kind of seems as if we now move to like the third level, which is logic. And also, so I was thinking of that like after the map, after the graph, now those science writing techniques and the origin of like the proposition and all of that. It's kind of like the third level, or like the third level after the notion of fence, the graph theoretic depiction of logistics, and now we have like the intelligibility kind of like that, like yeah, I mean, I was just like matching that to so the general point what I wanted to make was like I find it interesting how much we already like probably can find out about formalizing Mode B from the ways Mode B societies try to formalize itself in some way, like proto-formalize itself, like get an image of itself. So maybe like it's like really good to start with those attempts of Mode B to get an image of itself, to investigate the structure of writing, to investigate the way logistics were kind of like depicted in itineraries, or like how property structures were depicted in maps and so on. So yeah, that was just connecting. Like I saw a line of connection between Monica's talk and yours.
Yeah, that I could have made it more explicit, that line of connection, if I had covered surveying and how surveying and the layout of agricultural land around the temple, just how all of that was done. That could have been a connecting link. Uh, but yeah, I didn't cover that portion. But there is information like on how there was a different numbering system for how they would survey and allot land to certain foremen to develop or do whatever. So
Maybe you know what would probably a good start, if you would like explain a little more how you connect all of that to like Karatani's system. I don't know if that's that.
no, no, that was the last the comment I made before the conclusion slide of how these various scripts can be associated with the modes. Like the logo syllabaries can be associated with the pure mode B, and consonantal alphabets can be associated with the rise of mode D under mode B as universal religion, and the complete alphabet arises uh, with the Greeks, with where it's not fully commercial, but the markets and money system has started to come in and break down the tribal structures. So I guess at that level we can associate with the modes. But in terms of the sequence, we went from, let's say, tokens were still more associated with mode A societies. And a fully mode B society only appears when, those pictograms start being used to represent words, when phonetic abstraction takes place. And that is the point where we can say that mode B uh, takes over. And um, and after that, well, consonantal alphabets did also become state religions. So they arose with universal religions, but they did become like part of the official languages of world empires. So even they were used by mode B societies, and that is the similarity that Botero and Herrenschmidt both were pointing out, that for both consonantal alphabets and logosyllabaries, you have to be initiated into an oral tradition. You have to know the language to reconstruct whatever is written. And that is the main difference to uh, the complete alphabet which I'm associating with mode C. But even so, with the complete alphabet, as she points out, it you can read without understanding. So, say you take, if there is some Greek historian or something, he can phonetically reproduce the names and words of a different language, and the Greeks can read those words as the other people pronounce it, but they can't understand it. But this is impossible with the previous consonantal alphabets and logosyllabaries. But even the development of consonantal alphabets and logosyllabaries, it happened due to the interaction between communities when different languages and different people had to come and live together. So, yeah, I guess that's the way I would see it. Renzo, you had raised your hand.
Yeah. First, it was really, really cool presentation. I had no idea there were so many kind of stages to writing. Uh, but what I was thinking is trying to like separate the more contingent historical aspects of the development with relationship to the development of the state logic from the more kind of the ones that actually are needed to propagate the state logic. So I had the impression, and then maybe I'm wrong, that like the two, for example, this that you said, the emergence of, I think, the consonant, like system, which was probably like an effect of the interaction of societies, which should imply some kind of scale to and so on, seems to be like not necessarily like part of essential to it, right? But but there were like there are like these two technologies which seems to be like the capacity to collect taxes, right? To do the accounting, to know like how much of something and like how much you're due to pay to collect of products, right? Which is the taxing, and the other kind of later, I don't know how later, but the other technology being the law, right? That you like the contract and the law itself. And I was thinking that the first, with respect to the tax, it seems that already at the beginning, like to me, when you show like the development of the tokens, like emerging from one from like representing just like, like the amount, the thing, and the unit all at the same time. to being able to represent the quantity, the measure, right, the unit, and the thing. To me, that seemed like the basic kind of technology you need to actually collect taxes, right? You need to like say how much of which unit and what kind of thing. So even if from what I understand that was before the full emergence of the state, it seemed to me that that was like sufficient for the basic structure of accounting and tax collection be in place. And then I was thinking like, and I wanted to hear a bit like, then I was imagining like for the development of like written law, you would have to need like a full-blown kind of language, like writing system, right? So you have to like develop for a long time, a lot more like, I don't know, like thousands of years, and you can actually write down like a complex rule or law, right? So it's interesting, like I mean, if this is right, like you have these two stages perhaps of the development of the right technology for the mode B. So like the way you use language in the case of law, it's very different, right? You're not mobilizing anymore like the quantities, you're trying to like describe the rules, which so it's a different kind of requirement on language. Yeah, so to me, like it seemed that these two kind of steps of writing seem to be like what is actually conductive to the state logic, but I wanted to hear if this makes sense or you think it's
It,
yeah, it's make
it does make sense. Like I had pointed out, yes, absolutely, tokens are enough for dealing with accounting and logistics. And even when, even when in Greece they were developing the complete alphabet, uh, Greece was, being attacked by the Persians, and within the Persian Empire, in the agricultural hinterlands, warehouses were still using token technology. So, like token technology began 3,000 years ago, but within the core of the empire, it was enough. Like in rural, illiterate areas, you just need tokens to track how much sheep and grain and milk and everything is coming into the warehouse and how much has to be supplied. So, absolutely, tokens continue to be used at that basic accounting level for that logistic organization throughout this whole period that we've just passed. And as for law, law definitely came after speech, after the science became ordered according to speech rather than art. That was 2400 BC. So, like around 2400 BC, we can say that the first law codes of like we don't have evidence, but whatever later law codes are there, they seem to be developments of earlier law codes. So, by 2400 BC, we can say there were law codes, but not really because they were more like case studies. They were very particular. If this happens, if a widow loses a land or something. So it was very specific. But law code, as we understand it, where you have a general definition, this is what legal system means universally, and then it's applicable to all citizens of a certain nation, and then you define the nation and the citizens, and then you go category by category, all the laws. So that is a little later. That's like 2100 BC and so on. So there is a gap between this law aspect of the state and the accounting aspect, but the accounting aspect was under was the undergirding technology which just continued throughout, and law started a bit later. And there was one more thing. Uh, yes, I had the some of the slides that I skipped. One slide was on scribal culture, like from all these tablets. these tablets are written by the scribes, and they are writing about workers and foremen and delivery people. And so these are the two classes that we get to know information about: the scribes and the workers from the tablets. And I guess, yes, when I associated logographic or logosyllabic script with Mode B strongly, uh, it is because that those sort of scripts have a inherent, you know how in video games there is a difficulty curve. So like starting with a logographic script, is there is a difficulty threshold, and it takes a long time to train in such a language, and so the scribes have to go through a lot of training for it. I mean, most of the archaeological tablets we have are the equivalent of modern practice books, you know, like how school kids have those copies where they do their homework and they practice. And so most of the tablets are just scribal practice books. Like it's a so my point being that the power that this state derived from having a bureaucratic class was ultimately based in this uh, grasp of a script which allowed you to define the law as well as the accounting, and that it kept its power because of its difficulty threshold. That's, yeah, like in terms of power, that's what I would say. Yes, Gabriel.
Hey man, this was such a trip. Also, I started doing the dishes, then I walked the dog, then I'm here. Like I just felt like I went places while you were talking. Man, I have a lot of questions for you. One thing that I mean, I wonder if you think. Okay, so the first thing, uh, do you think that like I feel like often when we talk about the role of accounting and therefore commerce and so on, that this already brings, you know, the idea that, well, as you did like in your little diagram, you know, where there is a connection between commodities and accounting, right? But I mean, for example, you can have accounting as Renzo was highlighting, mostly for also for tax purposes or just for evaluating, you know, if what you own is still there. So accounting to me sounds like it's something very connected to making sure property is where it's supposed to be, not necessarily to commodity. But every time I read something about accounting, it's always so clearly about commodities, and so I wonder if we lose anything in your account, in your description, if we focus on that aspect, because for some reason it doesn't feel like it. It feels very directly related to the management of property. And I feel like there is something specific about that that is very relevant to what you were saying. So that would be my first question, like the property commodity issue, because it does feel like because commodities circulate across communities, it's gonna be this kind of underlying motivation that people are gonna focus on. Of course, there is commerce, there is wages often in many of these situations. So commodities are there. People are both selling things and creating things for them to be sold, which put them in the commodity form. But what is it that you're able to pin down when you do accounting? And even if it is debts and credits, profits and losses, like what gets to being printed on the surface, you know, from that process. So that was the first point. The second point is that I think that it was really, really interesting. I mean, I've seen this connection drawn elsewhere, but not with so much empirical stuff. I mean, for example, you know, random people like Jacques Lacan will love to point out the origin of writing and counting, right? But not, I mean, with absolutely no kind of nothing to back it other than the fact that he went to a museum at some point in his life. But when we go into counting, there is something very interesting, which is, the duality between cardinality and ordinality, right? I love to think about this idea that Frege had, that like you can actually count things without knowing the number of things you have. He says things like, cardinality is just a correspondence, which implies, for example, that if I'm a waiter and I'm making sure all plates have forks and knives, I just need to make sure that for every plate I put a fork and a knife there. I don't need to know how many plates and how many forks. I can do it without counting in that sense, right? It's counting just as corresponding, which is not the same as naming the set of correspondences that you've, right? So there were 10 plates. It's an ordering. It's more than 9 plates, less than 11 plates, right? But that there are plates to forks is just a one-to-one correspondence between plates and forks, right? The second connection, this corresponding connection, concerns cardinality, right? So the how muchness of it, or how many, the quantity of it, in that sense, doesn't require you to know the number, just requires you to be able to associate a mark to another thing, right? And the ordering is then a second operation, which is then how you're going to connect those correspondences to some envelope, right? And as we were talking about tokens and these literal envelopes, I was thinking about, cardinality and ordinals, and the jump from, when there are just too many marks to correspond to quantities, and suddenly you need to name the set of that quantity. So it just feels like a lot of this is very much at home at the problem of counting and naming what was counted, in the sense of, putting it into a set, right? Of course, I mean, we know that languages, I mean, pretty much 90% of French philosophy was built upon the fact that you guys think language is ordered and beautiful and classical. It's messy and inconsistent and whatever. But it doesn't mean that the part that interests the state, as Renzo was talking about, is not this particular one, that it does have the capacity to intermix cardinality and ordinality. So you start numbering things in the sense of just counting corresponding things to things, and then you can name the correspondence, and now you have some ordinal. And then you can actually now, again, kind of iterate these ordinals, and then you can name them again, and so on and so forth. So that kind of naming things logic that you were dealing with as well. So my first question had to do with that property versus commodity issue, which interests me a lot, because when we're doing when we're trying to recuperate Marx's categories, it just feels like the pure concept of quantity logically should come up very much later for commodities. Like if you are a commodity, it doesn't matter that, one thing is 3 kilos of rice and the other is 5 kilos of rice. They're either equivalent or they're not. And it's from the point of view of the state that it does seem like the accounting for where did 2 kilos of rice go actually matter in those terms, So I'm interested in how much I should be deriving of these aspects of Capital's formulations from the type of thing that you're looking into, which seems to be concerned with counting to begin with, right? And so the property commodity issue, this kind of logic of counting and its relation to accounting more generally. Then the third thing that I think it's very interesting, I wonder what you think of it, because it does, as you were presenting, it just made so much sense that law is something that comes much later. And the thing that I was thinking about is that, as you were presenting it, I was wondering, like, how far you need to go into the history of writing to have a way to write, like, not only to have shifters in the sense that statements that include the first person, but actually to be able to decouple statements into an impersonal form, because it does look like the law has a relation, like to enunciate something from nowhere, right? In a way that's not talking to you specifically, it's just saying something in general. And that does seem like a very specific mix between writing and speaking, right? It's almost like you, in the same metaphor we made in a couple of meetings before, that there is something which is like less than a complete communitarian logic that happens to the state. So violence is less than vengeance, it's not more than vengeance. It's like you interrupt something in the middle. It feels like the law is like you interrupt myths in the middle rather than fully expressing something in a communitarian sense that people can then find their place in it and so on. You stop before that. So there are many interpretations of the law, but the law gives the interpretations of the law. It's not a two-sided thing. So it feels like it's benefiting from something from writing, the fact that law requires writing to some degree to acquire that particular impersonal form. So I wonder what aspect of writing is it latching onto, So that would be my third question. So the property commodity thing, the counting and accounting thing, and then this issue, I just wondered like that aspect of writing there. And just reinforce, just to conclude, like the fourth thing is that I also think that I wonder, because you've been reading so much about this, I wonder how common this is, because it's something I always worry about. And I feel like philosophy of writing is always so close to philosophy of technology that I wonder how common this assumption is that, it's not that you have social relations that then render effective certain technologies. Like they might have even appeared many, many times, but they'll probably only become that effective where there is relations that propagate them. Usually you have the inverse idea that, there were no such relations until that technology emerged. So since sometimes in your presentation, especially I think that last philosopher that you were mentioning, it felt like she was taking that position that, and when writing appeared, all these categories were introduced into the world. So I also wanted you to comment a bit on this kind of inversions between sociality and technology. Sorry, it's a lot, I know.
Yeah, okay. I'll try to make some sense, and I'll go in inverse order. Um, so first about writing and social relations, I don't think. Yeah, I guess there is a definite stress on how the medium helps propagate the mode of exchange that orders the social relations. But of course, the social relations can. That's why I'm associating the media with the modes in a weak form. I'm not saying I'm associating them. I'm not saying that this is only dependent or determined on a certain mode. Like, for example, we in the present day society we still have logographic systems based societies. It's a capitalist society, but China, Japan, they have a logographic language basis, and that so you can have a certain kind of social relations using certain modes. It's just which is more suited, which sort of gives you the which is more suitable, the least friction in establishing a certain kind of social relation. Like it's mm, I don't know if I should even say this, but I mean, like, China is obviously it's part of a capitalist world, and it is part of a capitalist system, and yet it is a communist country, right? Like this paradox is there. So it's it, so yeah, I'm definitely not saying that it's strictly determined, But as for Herrenschmidt's point, um, yeah, she might sound a bit over, like she's giving too much credit for to something. But the main point that is important is that you get with, like, if we have to defend the Greeks and the continuation into the Western tradition, like, we get discourse, we get proper philosophical thinking with the Greeks, like theoretical stuff. Of course, for them it's not theoretical, to them it was metaphysics. When we read the Greeks, we fully secularize them and we make them into theoretical stuff. Um, so, so yeah, yes, but there should be, we should be able to say that there are cultural differences between social formations, even if they are in the same system, say under mode C capitalist system, but those cultural differences can be sort of given an account of using these differences in scripts and other, like, media. So yeah, I would say that it's possible to do that. Okay. I should also answer your other questions. Yes. I like how you said that law, when you start getting law codes, it's like where the mythical framework ends. That's what Herrenschmidt was pointing out, that when around the same time, like, for her, that is the point where the ideological shift happens, when Akkadian and Elamite is written with the same cuneiform script. So Elamite people, old ancient Iranian people, they stop believing that the names and their words, and they are just naturally associated with these signs, because now you have to use some other signing system to write your own language and some foreign language. And that is where the grasp of myth, which is, as she was trying to say, when we take names to be primordial, to just come with the social background, like death, birth, social relations, all of it, like names is just part of that social background. This sort of questioning of names, and it obviously Plato also does, is it in Meno, or I don't remember the dialogue, but he does it somewhere. So yes, law definitely, uh, because that point of writing two languages in the same script, why were they doing it? It was to justify some sort of inscriptional, like, you're pointing out that this stone marks the boundary of this king, and it has to be recognized by these two communities, the with these two languages, and they both should be able to recognize that, yeah, this is the border of the king's extent or whatever. So yes, there is a certain secularizing of the law happening from myth, and this, but as you can see, this is not happening at the individual level. This is happening at the king and the state level. And here I can go to your first point about property and commodities and like, okay, so to explain this, I'll have to make a very pedantic point. When we say that we were they were being taxed, that the subjects were being taxed for through tokens and accounting, we shouldn't use the word tax, because you see, as soon as we use the word tax, we imply that there is some other sphere, a market or economic sphere, from which someone is getting an income and the state is just taking a cut. But the point here is that at this early stage in civilization, there was no other property but state property. Like the people and the land, everything is of the state. So you're not giving tax, you're giving rent. Like the state has put you to work on this piece of land. Okay, you can get your own sustenance, but all the state cares is that whatever your dues are, you need to pay that. And those dues are, they should be more treated as rent dues rather than tax dues. And that also means that we can't really say that there were wages, because again this was all in the omitted slides, the slides I didn't cover. What they were really being paid out were rations, and the rations were, they had a standardized bowl, and this bowl had this amount of barley and like 2 meals a day. That was the standard ration for your workers. And a lot of accounts is just how much ration is being given out to the workers. And by the way, the foremen in charge of the workers were not the people in charge of distributing the rations, so they kept those power lines separate. Like the person getting you to do work was different from the person distributing. Even though they were both bureaucrats in the temple complex, they so yeah, it would be better to use the word rations instead of wages, and rent instead of tax, because at this point there is just absolute property, and it takes 1,000 years to get to the point of a legal code which can be written for individual cases. But even then, it's less individual cases and more family cases. Like everything is like the Mesopotamians did not have a concept of property. Like they did not have a word for it as we understand it. But most of their law is about the inheritance of property. And their biggest worry was the fragmentation of land. Because if you keep in, if one guy passes on his land to 3 kids and then 3 kids pass it on to 2 kids each, so the land is just getting fragmented and it's becoming agriculturally useless. So the big problem that the law codes dealt with were debt and land fragmentation, the earliest law codes. And of course, the fallout of war, orphans, widows, all of that stuff. So all this flavor I missed, I put it in the omitted slides because I had to just focus on writing, but it was there.
No, but this was great, man. Thank you.
Excellent. Your last question, your second question was the ordinal cardinal thing. I did not understand it properly, but I believe the thing that you're pointing out, that shift is in the literature, that is a shift from concrete counting to abstract counting. Because in concrete counting, you are still using each token as a representation of an object. So like if you pass on 6 sheep and 2 bales of hay, so there are 6 tokens and 2 bales of hay. But as soon as counting got abstracted, you could start saying ki, instead of, let's say you have a transaction of 12 sheep, but now once you've abstracted counting, you have a new ordinal which stands for 12. I'm getting this wrong, I guess, cardinal or ordinal, but like instead of repeating 12 concrete impressions, they would just put this one other sign which stood for 12 sheep. So yeah, that development happened early. In fact, I should have probably focused on the numbering systems and early numbering systems because they're more understood, and like yes, that would have been interesting too. I hope that was satisfactory.
No, that helped a lot. I was just gonna point that I think that if you take a look at just some explanation, doesn't need to be the original one, of Frege's proposal of how to kind of give the reason behind arithmetic, right? I think that there might be useful things there because it's very interesting how he's trying to explain the logic behind quantities pretty much and like basic arithmetic and so on. And he moves to the space of functions and properties and you know so I don't know. I think that there might be an interesting connection. But anyway, I don't want to take too much time.
All right, I'll check it out. John, you've raised your hand for a long time.
Yeah, first off, just want to say this was phenomenal. And like Mo said, I think you've improved like the way you're organizing the information and stuff. So it's like really good, and it's cool to see both the ideas and your process developing. Um, and I think a lot of your answers to some of Gabriel's questions help clarify some of the things I want to bring up because actually, just a couple weeks ago, Gabriel and I were talking about a lot of the attempts by some leftists to like interpret our current situation as like a kind of neo-feudalism or something like that, as opposed to uh, capitalism with an increasing dependence on rent. And I think it's really interesting to see how in these state formations prior to the dominance of commodity exchange, you see those same kind of like relations in a pure form, but that kind of like they're inverted in a sense that you know they were dominant in mode B, but they were very clearly concerned with commodity circulation and tracking that. And now we're in a situation where the commodity relation is dominant, and we're seeing an increasing need for capital to like fall back on these like mode B methods. And Gabriel shared an essay with me by can't remember his full name, Saito. He's spent a lot of time on like environmental aspects of Marx and reads his notebooks very well. He's an excellent scholar. Kohei Saito, thank you. And one of the things he points out that I think is another piece to add in here is of the three forms of surplus value kind of distribution, both profit and interest are ways of divvying up the surplus value that's extracted in production. But rent, even under capitalism, still remains kind of a pure appropriation. It's a different fundamental mechanism in relationship to the other two, which I had been kind of mistaking for a long time until I read Saito's essay. And I think that somehow, as we're exploring this, like in addition to in this conversation about ordinality and cardinality, is the way that counting, which I included this Leibniz quote about music and kind of, I think, back some of Gabriel's point about you don't need numbers to count. Like there's a capacity we have as humans to count, but then what we see with this process of abstraction, I think the really fascinating stage for me is the final step where you have the number and then the unit and then the commodity and that emergence of the unit, which if we zoom forward to like category theory, units are highly abstracted in category theory, but one of the main things that are used to like define all the other stuff. They're very fundamental kind of entities, which I'm hoping we can explore more technically in the future. But for the time being, I think that this like process of slowly, yeah, exactly, unitizing as a basic operation of mode B. I think that kind of process, right? Like there's a way that quote unquote pure mode C, when you're just engaging in barter based upon trying to get at like, okay, I don't know how much time you spent on, the harvesting the grain versus how much time I spent, spinning this yarn, right? So we're going to kind of go back and forth until we're both satisfied because we both feel like we're getting our time's worth in that exchange, right? But there's no real place for a unit in that. There's just this constant kind of back and forth negotiation. But for the state, and I find this also very fascinating, your example, this concern with property as a logistical problem, right? Like if you keep dividing up property, it's not that it poses an inherent problem to the logic of property because you can infinitely divide. It poses a problem due to the material substrates of soil, of plants, of the actual ways that the technology of hose and plowing and stuff worked, right? Like at a certain scale, if you broke down too small, agriculture ceased to function. So I think, and then finally, that bit where you're talking about rations as bowls, right? Like where you had an actual unit of the ration, right? So you had these units as rations, these units as rent, um, and the way that they were tied to the material substrate of agriculture and the technology around that. Uh, it shows again that this problem of property and logistics are so deeply intertwined, that even like you said, there was no word for property, but it was being talked about all the time. But the problems for them were posed in terms of how do we grow food, how do we deal with the aftermath of wars, and how do we make sure that this property is being passed on in a way that's like gonna prevent people from amassing debt and blah blah blah. So there's like this really interesting back and forth in terms of this highly abstract thing, law and property, which, like Gabriel was saying, has this kind of almost like not talking to anyone, but addressing everyone at the same time, embedded in these incredibly like contingent local logistical problems. And I'm thinking that this like and no, I agree with Mo. I think counting and unitizing are two distinct operations. We do have to distinguish those a bit more. Um, because 3 jars are different from 3 kilos, which are different from 3 truckfuls, right? 3 handfuls. They designate an actual like irreducible material reference point. Like even our standards, like I don't know where it is. Somewhere in France, there's a bar that stands in for all metrics, right? Like I think that the unit is a place where counting has to account for the material substrate. Might be one way to put it, but this is all like coming into my head. Yeah, I think this deserves a separate or like a whole conversation, because I think once we go into the category theory of unit, it starts to get pretty crazy. But like, yeah, but I think that this like these intersections of like what you talked about, the abstraction of quantity versus like, I can't remember what you used, magnitude or whatnot, but like those distinctions as they go out, and you mentioned Hegel, he made a lot of that distinction in his work too. But like, I just find it fascinating that it seems like it meets at this highly like abstract point of property and this highly like real like material substrate problem of like can we actually grow food if we keep subdividing? So I'll end on that.
Okay. Well, man, I don't know which part to respond.
Sorry, I was kind of rambling.
No, no. Yes, the rent. So I was discussing Kohei Saito with Raphael. He was asking about. I have not read him, but since Raphael said, I checked out his work, and we were discussing the same issues of yes, like the neo-feudal theory stresses the aspect of rent becoming important again. But as we're seeing, rent is more of it's a more of a general mode B phenomena. It's not particularly limited to just feudalism. Like feudalism was more than just collecting rent, and it was definitely not the kind of logistics and commodity kind of thing that we're treating in a mode B rent system, because by the time of feudalism we have money, so it's payment in money, not payment in kind. Like payment in kind was still there, you still had to do all the service and everything, but money was changing the. So neo-feudalism, I don't like that term just because feudalism was a more particular thing. And like how are you gonna say neo-feudalism? uh, if we start believing in capital as a god, as during feudalism people believed in the Christian god, then yeah, sure, we are going back into neo-feudalism. But I don't think we would ever have that kind of belief. So I think it would be better to um, describe uh, when was, if we are returning to a previous stage of capitalism, so what was that stage where it involved the state for extracting material resources without the interference of money? And that was obviously colonial capitalism, like um, even going back to Booleanism, like just the the enslavement of the Americas, the extraction of silver and gold, and all of that. That is when the capitalist state, quote unquote, was working in a way which can be closely compared to these ancient pure mode B states that we are comparing. And so then we can say, like, if it is a return of something, it's a return of the previous more savage colonial capitalism. But even that is not a good description, because ultimately we don't, our group's theory, like, we don't believe like colonial capitalism ever went away. Like, it just uh, it was just at the periphery, and now the periphery is expanding. So I guess that's how I would treat the neo-feudalist thing. I'd written to Raphael some exact lines. If let me just check if I can find it. Man, I can't find it right now, but that's. Was there something else, John, that I missed that's important? I'm really sorry.
Oh no, you're good. I am curious if you have thoughts on this question in the chat about unitizing, counting, and all that.
I do not know what unitizing means here. Can you tell me?
It means to make something into a unit. So like when you're talking about
Oh,
like designating a
uh,
jar as a unit, that is
uh,
to make a unit.
uh,
And I would assume that historically, when that process of abstraction, there was like a material process of actual standardization of what a jar was as well. But I don't know if what that means, like how close that is in terms of standardization versus the like extracting of a unit per se, you know? It might be that
yes.
people conceived of a unit and then started to standardize. I don't know. But anyway, I'm curious what you think about this, or if it's something you want to think about more before weighing in on. But otherwise, yeah, no, those were all really good responses to what I said. Thank you.
Uh, all I can say is that definitely the standardizing and unitizing went together. Like these standardized ration cups and a standardized measure of bushels of barley, not just on random basket size, but like a regulated basket size. All of these appear together, like the units and the standards. I hope that was satisfactory.
I think that's an interesting, a really interesting quote. Uh, I, I think that the reason why, I mean, I don't want to go too much into this, but the reason why it feels to me that this is like finding measure terms, right? Qualities of quantity, so to speak. It's actually, I mean, there's an interesting parenthesis there, but just before that, it just feels like it's already a further development from just the capacity to count, in the sense of to prescribe a correlation between indexes of one instance of something and that something, right? If counting is just this, very briefly, like I see 3 cows and I'm able to correspond a mark to a cow, and then another mark to another cow, and a third mark to a third cow. In the moment that I can then say, well, this type of quantity has a specific quality, right? And then I say, I count cows in the following unit, right? That feels like I'm naming the quantity and therefore giving it some specificity, right? But I mean, regardless, that does feel like it's still within the same kind of realm from this ordinal cardinal quantity as the how muchness, right? And actually the how manyness of something, and then the explicitation of the type of many. And maybe you guys can talk more about this also, because I've been looking into this, something that I think Renzo showed me, and then I went to learn more about it, which is languages that have measure words for most things, right? So a Chinese, like Mandarin and so on, that it has like it separates the quality of quantities very explicitly, which is not something you find in every language. And I think that it does feel, from a totally kind of speculative, coarse-grained thing, that places where you couldn't simply standardize things to the utmost degree, you had to kind of negotiate with local cultures more. You would have to have more kinds of units. You wouldn't be able to standardize it further, to the point that universal commerce allows you to pretty much have one quality of quantity, which is price, right? So maybe there is an interesting correlation there, but if you track, it feels like you need to start from the correspondence of things to marks, right? And there's a really cool paper for the math nerds, paper that Dennis showed me, called Categorification, which is all about, though it's 90% incomprehensible to me, it's all about explaining how counting gets collapsed into sets, and how this kind of just functional description of correlating marks to things would collapse into, the number as an entity and this sort of abstract aspect and so on. It's very interesting. But what I wanted to get to also is that, on the one side, there is counting, which feels very, very important. But on the other side, and I felt like this was, let's say, the part of it that I had the harder time following, but it wasn't due to your presentation, which was very clear, Slip. It was more due to not really knowing too much about this. So I'm still trying to understand like exactly the distinctions between tokens, tablets, alphabets, and thinking about it. But there is a process. I think a lot of people, a lot of thinkers associate the history of writing to the history of the interiorization of something, right? In the sense of more and more parts of a certain process are included in these technical operations of markings than they were in the beginning. So, for example, at the level of marks on a piece of clay that correspond to something, most of the operation is outside, right? And that relation to an outside that is much more indeterminate than the mark, which is pretty determinate, right? To a certain point, I mean, the efficacy of a mark, which is something that interested Lacan, to go back to him, a lot, like at which point is a mark and not just like just a faulty or insufficient imprint, right? It's very classical in the sense that once it's a mark, that's fine. Like once, for example, if you have a bad calligraphy like I had, like to the point that banks have called me when I signed the check asking if somebody defrauded me or something, but it was myself. you have the experience of this threshold between it's not a signature up to the point that it becomes a signature. And then it can vary inside of that realm, and it just remains what it is, right? There is something to write. I mean, you could examine writing in this kind of gradual sense. You haven't written anything, suddenly you have something like a drawing, and then you have like a degree of variation to your drawing, right? Let's say if I'm depicting a situation, every trace and every decision regarding the trace matters, right? Like it will change the physiognomy, it will change something about the style of the artist, it will say many things. But insofar as it's a picture of something, meaning it's supposed to correlate with something, it's not only that the variation that's relevant diminishes to the point that once I get some features in, it corresponds to the thing and that's it, right? But that it also seems to change logic as that variation decreases, like to the point that either you made a mark and it's sufficient to correspond to the cow, or you haven't. There isn't like, yeah, this is half of a mark, so I'll have to take half of the cow as the reference because it's a relevant difference, right? Or so it's it's the introduction of a cut in that sense, right? And in that regard, maybe going back to that previous nomenclature of discussing classical logic and cuts rather than classical logic and fences, which is more topological, as Mo was saying, might also clarify connections to writing. And but then it does look like, well, once you establish a cut and the relevance of that mark, that trace, it's all on the outside of the writing. You have a long history of making the connections between marks count more and more and more, and the connection with what's outside to be less and less clear. And right, I think that what you talked about, the last stage of this complete alphabet appearing, seems to be the final decoupling, because you don't need to be fully embedded in a implicit code of a certain language and culture in order to arrive at the writing and at least know this basic correspondence. It's the full development of a grammar seems to be the full development of an internal correspondence, not external, right? So if I get the feeling of how the next mark is determined by the previous ones, I'm good to some degree, right? So that does feel like there is a history of internalizing correspondence, which is kind of a mirrored, in my opinion, it is kind of a mirrored sorry, I just saw John's point. It is kind of a mirrored history to the problem, I think, of, let's say, establishing some sort of realm, right? And again, it's very interesting that we would say, everything is a property of the state in some degree, and then you're going to reorder internally to the point that you get properties belonging to the parts of the state. That's a similar process of internalizing correspondence of something which is like a very clear-cut, big totality with the indeterminate outside, right? So it does feel like there is a interesting kind of correlation between these two developments. I wonder if that's meaningful.
Yes, yes, it is meaningful, and I think it's the this when you talked about the flexibility of like how a signature can vary within a certain range and still be a signature, and then there is it's not or it is. So that variation in writing, that level of variation was available at the logo syllabary level, because as you saw, like people used the same cuneiform script to write different languages, and similarly, you can use a logographics script to write even different dialects. Um, so, like, different speakers will read the same sentence, but they will all verbalize it in a way which is different. Like, and so I guess that is where that script allows for that sort of flexibility. In one would be the level of external flexibility, like you're writing different languages with the same script, and there would be an realm of interior differentiation where you're writing different dialects with the same script. And as different dialects or different languages pick up these scripts, they also stylize them according to different regions. So like there are these minor variations, just stylistic variations. It's the same script, but say people have chosen to write it in different fonts. So um, so yes, the difference in dialects also gets coded ultimately in the difference in style in script, and differences in language, of course, lead to different usage of the same script. Like in a few generations, you won't recognize the way, like say for example, Taiwanese and mainland Chinese Mandarin, like they can use the same set of characters, but they're writing very different languages. In fact, you brought up the Chinese measure word. See, this is to me, this is why I associate logographic scripts with mode B, because they have all these remnants of pure mode B, just dealing with, if measure words have come into Japanese from Chinese also, but in Japanese it's really confused. It's just a list of counters, and it's completely postmodern. Like there is a category for small animals. Okay, ko. That's the category for small animals. Then there's a category for large animals, which is I think it's dai. And then there is a category specifically for birds and rabbits. There is a different counter word just for birds and rabbits, and it seems that at some point in Japanese history they were only allowed to hunt birds and rabbits, and so to get away from the government censors who were finding out if you are, how many wild animals or animals are you killing, or whatever censors they were doing. To get away from that, they developed this different counter word to keep track of killing birds and rabbits, which they were doing for food. So in Japanese, there is no logic, but in Chinese, I don't understand Chinese. Monica would be better who would know. But as I understand, in Chinese, measure words are grammatically used. Like they change the scope, and they change a lot of things from what I understood. But in Japanese, it's not. So in Chinese, the way those counter words are being used, that is like a remnant of a mode B culture, like where they had to deal with commodities directly without the mediation of a unit or a price, some one thing that could represent all of it. So yeah, I in the present day, if you have to see the differences between alphabetic and logosyllabic scripts, I mean that is the comparison to do, like Chinese versus English or Japanese versus English, but Japanese is not so pure as Chinese is. Oh, and you were talking of that shift. You were talking of ordinals to and cardinals again, and I forgot the context, but there was Maybe you will remember the context if I
I think
give you
the
the
point
example.
was like how to move from how to interiorize the problem of correspondence so that it's no longer
Yes.
external, right? I mean, classically, this is the issue of what we call the successor function, right? Rather than
The what?
generating successor function, rather than generating numbers by correspondence to something outside, you generate a function that generates the next number out of the previous number, right? That's how you would go to abstract infinite, potentially infinite counting. Like rather than saying, I counted 1 cow, 2 cows, 3 cows. You say, I've counted 1, I've counted 2, next comes 3, next comes 4. Now I don't need to refer to cows, right?
Yes, so I don't know if there's a successor function here, but there is a great example to illustrate this shift from concrete counting to abstract counting, this interiorization of um, and like it's a literal interiorization because there was an overlap in that early stage that I was talking about, from tokens to envelopes and then tablets, right? So there was an overlap when there were those clay envelopes with tokens inside them. There were also tablets being used, and in fact tablets and clay envelopes were used for the same transaction. So we have records. Uh, so basically, the point where they would have realized that we can do something like an abstract counting from concrete counting was when they would have to sum. It was during summation, because when you're summing on a tablet, you're using the ordinal words, like say you have a hexadecimal system, 1, 12, 60. It's you have a token to represent 1, a token to represent 12, and a token to represent 60. And you've impressed them on a tablet. And so when you're summing it, you would obviously have less symbols than the individual records because you have summed it, so there will be the bigger units that are being used and some whatever leftover units. But that same transaction also happened in the envelope. So in the envelope, the tokens are as it is. They are just concrete counting measures. So when they would have had to equate the tokens in the envelope with the impressions on the tablet, that's when they could have seen that we on one side we have all the tokens continue to stand for the whole sum, but on this side we have less marks. We don't have all the marks. uh, we have bigger unit marks, and because we've summed it, um, you know let's say it was 72, let's say whatever it was, sheep or whatever. So on this side there would be 12 6 times, and then on this side after 12 6 times and 12 1 times, they would put it together as like the one big 60 sign and one 12 sign. But on this side we have all the tokens, the 6 tokens of 12 each. So I guess it was at that point that they shifted from, when they started equating these accounts and started seeing you don't need to have all the original signs, tokens to represent the sum. The sum can be represented with less signs than the full. I don't know if that helped.
It does. Can I just make 2 comments here? One that's crazy, the other is even more crazy.
Chat is going.
Sorry. The very, very crazy one, for if anyone wants to go deeper into this counting state issue and so on, is that there is an amazing book by an anthropologist called Jadran Mimica called Intimations of Infinity. And it's about the counting system of an African people called the Ikwaye. I have the PDF here, I can send you guys. And the interesting thing about their counting system is that they don't have writing. Their main support for counting is body parts. So they count with their fingers, with their toes, but the genius of it is that they count with the fingers, then the hand, meaning they had access to a connection between correspondence in the cardinal sense and ordinals in the sense of a totality of a thing that was immediate due to the support. So what's crazy about that? They had the idea of infinity as a totality, so an infinite set, much, much earlier than anyone that we know of, right?
Oh.
So it's amazing to see like it, and it is kind of a paraconsistent idea because you can have discrete things that are one, right? In a certain sense, when you get to 5 fingers, you have one thing because it's the hand, right? And they can play with that duality in a very interesting way. So it gives rise to a kind of different way of thinking about counting and so on. And this guy explores it in deep detail. It's really amazing. I really recommend it. I'm gonna send it here to you guys. But it just goes to show that I mean, there is a history, there is a history of counting that has writing as a special support, but there are probably other histories where counting doesn't really develop certain properties, or some properties are not the ones that people focus on, and that actually leads to something which is like a inconsistent type of mathematics that is also very, interested. A lot of people are interested in it today as contemporary mathematicians, right? I'm just sent you guys the book. So that was the last crazy remark. The crazier remark is that yes, we were having a crazy chat here on the crazy conversation on the chat about this move from counting as correspondence of just, let's say, the most base is not even, don't have a concept of quantity because you don't have, you can inferiorize the fact that you're corresponding things and say, I'm corresponding them under a certain type, right? You're just corresponding things. So there is that. But it's interesting because there is a whole trend today in mathematical logic that is trying to deepen the understanding, deepen the connection between concepts and quantifiers. Because in a certain sense, they behave the same way. When you have a concept of all blue things, blue is kind of like a quantifier that only ranges over blue things, right? Like between the for all and the there exists, there is something called just the blue things. So from a certain perspective, they're just defining the range, right, of things. So why am I saying this? Because I mean, there is a lot of discussions about the birth of a certain type of conceptual thinking and conceptual language out of writing, because it doesn't seem to have a reason anywhere where writing didn't arise, right? But a lot of it to me is weird because a lot of it is a kind of a philosophical attempt to derive the realm of abstractions out of the fact that writing has some autonomy, right? I think you even mentioned this today, like, well, writing separates two realms, and therefore the body emerges as something which is almost like separated from this realm of ideas, right? But there would be a more logical description of this, because if at the origin of writing, or for a long time, writing was concerned with defining the proper range of correspondence, right? So for example, this discussion about the how many and the types of measure units, that's a very rudimentary conceptual distinction, right? When I say I measure rice in terms of kilos or in some other term, right? I'm defining a quality and associating it with a quantity, which is pretty much how attributes work. I give you an attribute and then I define the range of it. And I say, like, let's just talk about chairs. And then we only talk about these things and not about other things, right? So there is like a deep down, there is a very profound correlation between highlighting concepts and, let's say, highlighting measure words, It's almost like it's the prehistoric or the underlying. You need that logic to get to that other logic in a certain way, you know? So that's why I say it's very crazy to think about that, because that just sounds lunatic, but it's very interesting. And it reinforces this idea that, and I think that, for example, this idea that property is a very important point of view to understand the state, and that it has this initial ambivalence about, are we talking about property in the sense of alienatable goods? Are we talking about attributes of things, right? This discussion about the how manyness and so on and so forth is pretty much the point of contact between those two things, right? To properly account for the quantity of things is to engage in a particular conceptual explicitation of what counts for that thing to be that thing, right? So it's interesting to see that.
Okay. Well, first of all, I absolutely agree that there are other ways of, uh, like, we have a whole range of practices and techniques, and only some techniques lead to certain media being generalized at a level that they can sustain a whole mode of exchange. Like, it's not, like you pointed out, this African tribe, this is a great example. Like, they started from a different technique of counting, and they went towards a more paraconsistent or inconsistent but generative style of counting, which is very different from what was happening here. And yeah, um, and when you were talking about concepts as measure words, that somehow reminded me of reggae. Like, doesn't he talk of concepts as extension?
Yeah, he's the guy. He's the man in that regard. Yes.
Yeah, yes, that's absolutely.
Holy crap. So if you were, man, I couldn't. I would be sentenced to death very quickly then, due to my terrible uh, writing.
My handwriting was okay, but I would fill up the whole page. I wouldn't waste space, and people hated that because just you still can't read anything, even if it's written clearly. If you filled up the whole thing. Oh, John has his hand raised. Sorry.
Oh, you're good. I just wanted to point to a few things I dropped in the chat. One is the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy entry on inconsistent mathematics, and there's tons of references at the bottom, but it talks about in terms of arithmetic, which obviously starts with counting in a lot of ways, like that there is an entire, in particular, this guy Chris Mortensen has built out and shown how you can reconstruct arithmetic and calculus and geometry and all kinds of advanced within inconsistent mathematics. So that I think is a nice complement to the intimations of infinity, because it's something that's from within our framework being explored. And then this other PDF is from my main man, William Levere, who, Gabriel, this is for you and adjoint functors, showed that there was a relationship between universals and existentials and the process of naming, what he calls dummy variables. So he has like two adjoint functors and then another one coming the opposite way, which basically shows that there's a binding relationship between, saying something exists or that all, and then actually the operation of reaching out and picking from the available variables a name for what you're extending over. So there's a very strict relationship, which I think will go back to your earlier comments about naming and counting and whatnot, that he maps out as like his first major, it's his major work in semantics. Yeah, I think Dennis was the first one, as is often to introduce the crazy mathematics as Dennis, but yeah, no, Mortensen, I've been reading him too. He's wild. But this essay from 94, I was just skimming it. I haven't had a chance to get into it yet, but it talks about measuring, it talks about borders, it talks about Hegel. And it's in a very short essay. So he's attempting to reconstruct. I mean, the first line is the thesis is that the explicit adequate development of the science of knowing will require the use of the mathematical theory of categories. So he starts very much like that. Category theory has something to say about obviously knowledge itself, but then goes through and kind of shows the process of like measurement and uses some of Hegel's categories that to show how category theory can actually recapture a lot of Hegel's dialectic in terms of precisely this stuff that we're talking about right now. And so we've got measurement, we've got borders, and he's talking about closed sets as well. So in topological terms, that's analogous to inconsistent mathematics. So, that's a good text. I think we could probably, and there's stuff in Levert in general, I think we should dig through. He was a crazy Maoist. He's the only person I think that's ever quoted Mao in a mathematics paper. But I think that I got to go after this, but I think that this has really helped frame a good, like you said at the beginning, like it helps lay out the empirical information for us to really start to dig through what are the like intercourse between the modes, right? Like we're talking about like higher order kind of shit. And I think this has been incredible slip. So thank you so much for all the work you've done. I'm sure it's like a ton of intellectual digestion to be able to process this. And also like, I know on top of studying all this, you're also engaging with all the other work to fit it in. So just thank you so much for all the effort. And looking forward. Unfortunately, it sounds like you have to do a presentation on number now, since you didn't get to see those slides. So we'll have to add that up down the road. Yeah. But thank you so much, man. This has been great.
Okay. Before you leave, should I even answer? Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
totally. I'm not leaving immediately.
Okay. Shit. What was I gonna say? I forgot. Yes. Yes, I think you are absolutely right in pointing out the connection. If I got it right, Lawware it was trying to prove like how names are dummy variables between existentials and universals. And yeah, I think you're right in pointing out that this is exactly the point in language when the pressure to write another language in a script which people had been using they had taken it as a given because they didn't have interaction with other languages, so they were just taking it in that mythical way that names are true and so on. And when they start interacting with other communities and same script is used to write different languages, the value of names goes away and we start seeing that they're actually built out of syllables, and I think there is something there. In fact, so I've been trying to keep up with the math side of the group, and I've been trying to understand category theory better. And I believe at some point Gabriel had recommended the book by Eugenia Cheng. Am I saying that right? And like, my God, she takes 400 pages to get to adjoint functions, right? Like, so I'm halfway through the book, like I haven't even properly started category theory, but like whatever I read from it, this same difference between existential and universal, it happens in the portion on isomorphism, I believe, because she says that saying that there is an isomorphism and showing that there is a particular isomorphism between two categories is two different things. Like saying something, a category is isomorphic to another is different from actually showing an isomorphism between the categories. I'm just spitballing here. I don't know what that relevant, but that's what I reminded me of. Yeah.
Just to add to what John said, and yeah, I think it's just a I'm not sure about it, but it just looks like a fruitful avenue for us more generally, and I think that it might reflect on this discussion, but I'm not clear on how. Uh, is that, we've spent a lot of energy trying to understand this sort of minimal, what we call transcendental points of view, right? For example, the fact that you can compare two things just for the sake of seeing if they're equivalent or not, or if the fact that you can compare two things or evaluate two things in a different sense in which they might not just be equivalent to some degree, right? Gradually, marginally, but they can be both the same and not the same in this very consistent way, and so on and so forth, which is always a way of going from things to some logical domain. And I feel like what John brought up, and I think we're starting to look more carefully into, is that we know there's not going to be a complete equivalence between these mappings from things to whatever logical existence they have and back. Things are left out once you reduce them transcendentally, so to speak. But that doesn't mean you can't go back and then look at things from the standpoint of this logical existence that they have. That is a kind of equivalence, but it's not going to be an equivalent equivalence. It's going to be a wonky equivalence. It's like equivalent in different ways, or so, something like this. And I think that this idea of adjunctions, which is pretty much a sort of in-between theory of equivalence, it's not full isomorphism, it's not just correspondence, it's more than correspondence, less than an isomorphism. It feels like it's the type of operation that is going to allow us to extract a bit more of nuance from these operations. Because, for example, we're trying to use this in our description of value to account for the distinction between use value and value. For example, the fact that when you map things into their value, you kind of envelope them, and you talk to them in their totality, right? To say two things are equivalent, it's to talk about them as a whole, as a set, or as a kind of entity. But to talk about the use values of them is actually to talk about their parts. It's not really it's kind of, one seems to synthesize them upwards, the other synthesizes them from the bottom up, so to speak. That's a kind of inequivalent equivalence, or a kind of wonky equivalence, right? And it might be interesting to see how these things play out in the other modes. So, for example, there might be ways of talking about counting, or kind of this standardizing or unit forming that envelopes things upward speaking, from top down. And there are things that give them some basic common ground from the bottom up. And those are kind of connected, but not necessarily the same. So there might be some development there, but I feel like it's still an early idea we need to look carefully into. But yeah, no, man, this was really, really, really amazing. I feel like it's also something that I think everything in this series, especially Monica's presentation and your presentation, both of them, like most presentation to me was very kind of conceptual vertigo, because it's just like, holy shit, all these different approaches, and we don't know how to find the kernel of it, to the thread. But I feel like in the case of the state, it's really crucial to have a lot of empirical data and kind of just a sense of the eons that it takes for things to coalesce, because it is a very important aspect of what it does follow from what we're doing, that the logic of the classic logic is the least likely to take a hold on of the world, like to actually put things into a classical ordering and to fit them in this classical sense. The world is not really fit for that, like just as it is, like just because of entropy, it already makes it hard to just say this is what it is. If you wait 5 minutes and it's no longer that. So just entropy itself is, you can either go Heraclitus about it and just say it is and then it is not. Entropy will say, yeah, that feels okay. Or to have a gradual approach through material reality. It is, but it's no longer exactly what it was, and so on. But to have these cuts pierce through all of that and kind of set up something that can be ordered, hierarchically organized, that's like a monumental task. And I do feel like it would be I mean, I've read interesting papers on this, but on contemporary things. Like, I remember we invited, I forgot her name, Amelia, uh, I think Davenport, I forgot her name, but she was studying uh, just some aspects of economics and so on. And she sent us a really interesting paper about the cost of taking care of property in modern capitalism. So how much money goes into just making sure that fences, borders, and limits are where we said they are. So policing, surveillance, like it's like a huge cost that is not directly spent on making things happen. It's just spent on making sure that the things we want to happen the way we want them, right? It's a logistical cost, in other words. Uh, and it feels like the logic of the state is the one where this is the most evidently problematic point, because the world will resist this type of logic to a degree that it doesn't resist other things. So you need to do something and then put somebody there. Like, you create a wall, and then you need to have somebody taking care of the wall, because if it became a material thing, it will degrade. Somebody can use the bricks first. Like, you need to, you know what I mean? Like, so it feels like there is always this constant redoubling of the logic of the state, which is not that obvious for commerce, for commodities, and for communities. You know, uh, so to me, it also justifies why such a long history and why such a kind of, you know, kind of strained and kind of dispersed history as well, because it just feels like it's not enough to find the logical next step for something. It just requires such an infrastructure to be held in place. It feels,
Yeah,
if it makes any sense, like, because at the same time, it feels like most of our known history is that. So maybe that's a bit of a paradox.
yes, absolutely. That I mean, I agree completely. I might not have understood everything, but I agree with whatever I did understand. Um, yeah,
Like, this is something that bothers me. I can tell you why. Because it's just a very naive sense that there was like an immemorial history of the domination of Mode A. There was like a very long history of statecraft, thousands of years. And we are supposed to believe that Mode C is going to last in domination for like 500 years, and we're going to get out of it. Like, should we be ready for 10,000 years of this? Uh, but I think that argument concerning the connection between like logic and its enforcing might explain why you need like a long period for state domination, and you can have like a huge intensification of development with capitalism that kind of constrains or condenses that long history into something much shorter, because it finds such easy propagation, like a more virtuous one. I don't know. That's my optimism, because then it would be time. Then it's like then it is on, right? Otherwise, maybe we're getting into capitalism now, like, and that scares me.
oh yeah, that is a horrendous prospect.
Yes, exactly.
It's like a nuclear winter. Raphael,
Yeah, just want to start by man, this was a great presentation. Unfortunately, as I've told you, I was traveling along the presentation, and in the beginning of the discussion, I went to get some bread, and I was stuck 20 minutes in a place with no Wi-Fi and no signal, so I was very sad. But then I got home, and I think this discussion like really excited me to. I mean, I mean, I just want to also give a shout out to Mo for building it, gathering everyone. I mean, this has been incredible. But what I wanted to say, I was thinking about this aspect of the duration of mode B consolidation. And I just wanted to add that because I'm currently working on an essay with two other members of CSO, and it's about land struggle in Brazil. I mean, I think eventually we will maybe try and do a presentation because I think it's there are some interesting discussions there. But I was discussing this with Gabriel because he was editing the piece, and then there was this very important issue that I think like really made sense hearing this last point of the discussion and the timeline scale that your work, Slip, and Monica's was working on, which is because it does seem that when you think about colonization, like it's very common in our discussions on peripherization and alignment and misalignment to discuss about the inconsistencies, the difficulty of alignment, etc., the cost of trying to align stuff, etc. But there was an issue that I think really got clear when I was discussing some issues with Gabriel, because when we talk about the history of land enclosures in Brazil, and I think in the Americas in general, but maybe the US has a different history, so I won't put my hand in the fire for that. But the Portuguese, they found a problem, which was there was too much land, which is good because, I mean, you want land to produce and you want to export sugarcane and whatever. But it was so much land that people didn't need to work and to exploit, didn't need to put themselves in situations to be exploited. And I think it was a very different story from the accumulation processes in England and in Europe, because the Amerindian people that lived in those lands, they had no relation of property to the land, you know. So there wasn't that situation where I think I even discussed this with you, Slip, about at the end of the day there was some like imperial farm that had a stake in the land, and I mean there was all these forms of establishing a property farm in the land. And if you look at indigenous people, their way of relating to the land is not related to a fixed space. It's not related to a fixed people. There are all these different arrangements where you live in a place for a couple of months and then you go to another place of a family, where a group where you have an alliance, and then you have a farm there, which is not a farm in your place. And then you go to a third place to hunt and fish, and then everyone goes camping and whatever. And then there are these cyclical structures. But I think like in the end, it's the Portuguese, when they came here, it was really a territory. I mean, it was a continent where the form of property was not, I mean, I wouldn't say completely unconnected, but it seems to have it seems to have no hold of how you relate to the land, up to the point that you can't simply conquer and dominate the Indians and that will make you conquer the land, you know? And there's this phrase, like it's a formula by a Brazilian sociologist, where he says that since you don't have and this will get back to your Atlas contribution also, since you have a regime of free land, because you can just, like, if you are a free worker but have no lands, you can just go a bit further than the ray of influence of the colony, and then you can live on subsistence and whatever. You prefer to live poorly. But since you have free lands, you need a regime of captive labor, slave labor, basically. And then only when you have like a form of enclosing the land, can you actually have the free labor? So, I mean, the history of the colonization process seems to be like this really intense and costly struggle to put a property form into the land. And I think like the fact that there are lots of struggles in the history of Brazil that cannot be simply a matter of redistributing land or reduce or trying to get fairer conditions for labor. It's like it's there are lots of especially indigenous struggles and quilombola struggles. They are more about resisting in some the property form to land. And I think that I haven't fully worked out like the extent, because I think it relates to to a bit of your discussions. But when I think like when he says that when you have free land, you need captive labor. I mean, I think that there's this idea that it's a very clear, I won't say proof, but a very clear indication of how property relations, they are fundamentally social relationships, in the sense that you can only establish this social relation with the land after you have embedded in some sense this relationship in a society. So I mean, I think like the history of Brazil is like it seems like, yeah, it really is costly to do this type of, I mean, to build from scratch, like in the quick time frame, which is capitalism, which is like 400 years. But it's like you will leave a lot of stuff out. It will have to be extremely violent, so you can, do the time skip of having enclosed lands where there was none. I mean, sorry, that was just like musings, not really a question, but
No, no. I'm. I don't know much about the Brazilian scene, but it seems I could see an ecological comparison with this area that I've just studied. This, like, you said how there is so much more resistance because just the indigenous relation to land is just not, it's a very different relation. And then what the property form that is brought in by the state through enclosure and stuff, and this sort of community, it was so much harder to enclose them. I think the process in the Near East, in Mesopotamia, was easier because of the ecological conditions. I mean, there were still people just running away and escaping these early states. There's again this in the omitted slides, all this stuff was covered. Like most of the records, they about workers, they do track how many died, how many escaped, and the numbers are huge. So a lot of people were going out, but also a lot of people were coming in, and so the difference is a lot of people were coming in because, well, I'm sure you missed the early slide, but I had shown a map, and basically the Persian Gulf is what is now what was once Mesopotamia and what is now Iraq and Iran. So the Persian Gulf there, it's receding. The sea has been going back and giving out land. And so these early states that I just talked about, these Uruk and all, they came up in that area. So this is a portion beneath the hills, but the sea is receding. So it's the sea, as the sea was receding, it didn't leave plains. It didn't leave a lot of agricultural plains. What it left was salinated soil, and once you have salt in the soil, not a lot of things grow. So as long as the sea was there, it was marshland, and in marshland you have a lot of wildlife and a lot of flora and fauna. You can eat and drink whatever you want. You don't really care of having to become part of a state to get your rations. But as the sea receded and left this salinated land, the marshlands turned into deserts. And so, as this desertification happened, the cities, these early cities, uh, as we go later in history, it's the cities closer to the hills that start to dominate because they had just run out completely. Like they were not sustainable anymore because as the sea was receding, it was just leaving what was once flourishing marshlands into deserts. So the early states couldn't support themselves for long. But as long as they were there, I think they did. Obviously, they were capturing slaves, but also there were people there, immigrants, so to speak, because that was the best option in that ecology. If it was like Brazil, I don't think they could have gotten away with that kind of, because this again, I don't know if you this also came up. The John had brought up the question of the neo feudal thing, and we have talked about it, and so I feel like it's if we have to say that capitalism is going back to something, then it's not feudalism. It's better to say like the early stage of capitalism, colonial capitalism, where the state was directly involved in extracting labor and resources from the ground. So, so yeah, that's what I would say. Was that okay? All right. All right.
Yeah, I think it must be very late.
Yeah,
for you.
I just checked. It's 4:30 in the morning,
Holy
man.
crap, man.
Like, I think we need someday to do a meeting where it's like 6 o'clock where you are, and we will
We will
all
accommodate. Yeah, we need that.
we will accommodate. I mean, this is our gift. This is a gift that we need to do
No,
someday.
no, it's fine. It's fine. I mean, I anyway. I stay up late anyway. It's fine.
Uh,
Sleep, thank you so much, man. This was really, really, really great.
Thank you guys for like just listening to my stuff and actually making sense of it. Like it's amazing.
No, it was really good.
yeah, thanks a lot. It was
I hope you
incredible.
get some rest, though.
Yeah, I have to. I have some stuff in the morning also.
So in about 2 hours, in about 3 hours, you have to. Okay.
I'll do it in the afternoon. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. All right.
Great
See
seeing
you
you
guys.
guys.
I guess. See you.
Bye bye.
Hey,
Bye.
everyone. Bye
Bye.
bye.
Bye.